And he talks about having a shared common language for thinking, which is really interesting in that we need to make those connections, but we need to be able to articulate our thinking, how we learn, that metacognition.
We're about to have a conversation with a remarkable head teacher, Rachel Jacob. She's the head teacher here at Pinkwell Primary School in the heart of Hayes. I first met Rachel about 10 or 11 years ago when she was head teacher in Merton at a school called Hillcross. To add to her credibility, Rachel has also been a national leader of education. She's been executive head and head across a number of schools and has taken JNC with her to almost all the schools that she's worked with in the last 10 years. She is incredibly charismatic, incredibly passionate about creativity and creating a broad and balanced curriculum for the next generation. Come on through. Yeah, so I've known you for what, like 9-10 years now?
Absolutely, long time. Absolutely. Right from when JNC first started.
Absolutely, and obviously we've grown. I've seen you grow so much as a leader and go through so many different transformations. Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, and I'd love to just watch from a distance your journey. And
and I've loved watching yours as well from the very first start of JNC. But I think what made us perhaps connect with each other quite early on when we first met was that both of us have that central core belief that actually a child's well-being, a child being happy, us nurturing talents for each child is really important. Yeah. I think our core central beliefs around children being happy, their social and emotional well-being, being cared for and seeing them as individuals and nurturing those talents as individuals is really important. Because my belief, and I think yours is too, that if a child isn't happy, they're not going to learn. Absolutely. So that happiness is really important too.
Where did that sort of drive on creating a real broad and balanced curriculum come from? Because every school that I've been to where you're head teacher or executive head teacher, it's bright, it's colourful, it's engaging.
Yeah. So I think for all of us, we have that initial, I always say those first impressions count. So for me, a learning environment is really key to a child's success and their engagement in learning. So first of all, making something vibrant, exciting, fun, stimulating. In the school here, our vision statement is inspire, motivate, succeed. For me, that first step is inspiring children. But the reason that we look at, I tend to think my leadership focus on looking at the curriculum as a whole is that every child has a natural choice, a natural ability to in certain things, but equally we need to help the children to understand that they can be good at anything. They can have a dream and they can believe in that, but they can only do that when they make those connections with things that become obvious to them with those things that are not so obvious. So making
how did you make that connection?
I think I made that connection very later on in life. So I had some interesting experiences myself as a child. I remember a primary school teacher very well. Her name was Mrs. Lapworth. And I had a real passion for music. I love music. And she made music come alive within the curriculum. So she would quite often play music as part of our history. Sometimes when we were writing stories, music was very much a part of that. So I think that was very early on experiences. But then as I grew up, I had experiences where they were very discrete subjects. And I didn't make those connections myself as a learner. And so therefore in secondary school, I really struggled with particularly scientific subjects. I struggled with history because I couldn't connect the relevance.
I had exactly the same thing, and that's why I found that sports was so important to me. And that was my channel. Music was yours. It's not like in sports was mine. And that's why I found my channel. And then once I learned that sports was scientific, I learned to love the scientific side, and then I started to unravel those connections, and then I was actually able to become better in the academic side of study as well.
So it's only actually for me much later in life, actually probably when I was at university, where actually I then began to flourish, and I realised as a teacher and then later on as I've grown as a leader that actually making those connections in learning for the children is really important. Making it, firing all those neurons, but making sure those connections actually happen. So much learning is lost at primary school level because teachers are not making those connections for the children. So actually actively being aware that as teachers and as leaders we need to make those connections. So a broad, balanced, cross-curricular approach to learning in a primary school, I think, is absolutely key.
Very cool.
Otherwise, children never, in the world that we live in, those connections are all multifaceted.
And then children can't effectively apply the skills that they've learned because they're refined, they're one-dimensional, they're quite linear and only geared towards one specific outcome, as opposed to a much broader outcome, which is possible, right?
Absolutely. And I think I was very lucky quite early on in my leadership career, my headship career. I met an American professor called David Harley, and he talks about having a shared common language for thinking, which is really interesting in that we need to make those connections, but we need to be able to articulate our thinking, how we learn, that metacognition.
Teach me something.
Okay.
Because you're fairly new to the school. How long have you been in the school now?
So I've only been here since January.
So 8 weeks, pretty much.
9 weeks.
So how do you go about you having this big, broad vision in your head around creative curriculum, broad and balanced curriculums, how you want to engage and inspire learners? You've got one of the biggest schools that I've ever been in here, 5 formentary. How do you go about articulating that message to your team to get that vision and that articulation of that vision through successfully?
I think I'm going to use 2 terms which you probably you may have heard of before. I use the whiffum and the waggle. I don't know if you've heard of both of those.
Whiffum?
The whiffum, yes. The whiffum, what's in it for me? So starting that training and that talking about a shared vision. I think a vision, there's no point a head teacher having a vision if it's not a shared vision.
Indeed.
It needs to be a shared vision. And staff have got to understand what's in it for them. So I always start from their own standpoints. So what inspired you as a child? What made you want to learn? What are you interested in? Why? Do you have a teacher, or even better, do you have a leader that you really look up to? Why is that? So starting from that standpoint and beginning to help staff to understand the importance of some of those behaviour traits, if you like, that we have as learners, but as teachers, as leaders of learning in the classroom. I think we're all leaders of learning. It doesn't matter what role you have in school. And then helping staff, once that they understand their place in the jigsaw puzzle, if you like, of a team in a school. Actually then what a good curriculum looks like, what a good one looks like, a waggle.
So do you actually, with the whiffum phase, do you actually meet with people individually? Do you do it as a group? Is there a certain system that you have?
Okay, so I always, when I come to school new, I always meet with people as individuals first, before I meet with them all as a larger group. And I do that because I think sometimes in schools, understanding what excites people, what their talents are, what motivates them, what inspires them as staff is really important to understand, and to look at what skills and knowledge base have you got within your staff team. So I'm really lucky here. I have a hugely skilled staff team, very enthusiastic, but I don't think there's been that fusion until recently of people understanding how they can help and support one another. So valuing, nurturing those skills and knowledge, and making sure that those people are aware of how they can use those within their jobs, within their job description. So having that clarity of how does my particular skill fit within the job you're asking me to do, Rachel, or what can I do in terms of supporting the children in that respect?
So we were just talking, you've got 4 deputy heads here. You've got a site manager who leads a team himself. How do you go about distributing that leadership effectively, and what are the differences between sort of managing a large school and managing a much smaller school? Because I know that you've been through the journey, right? You've done it all.
Absolutely. I think there are some traits of leadership that are the same, whichever, whether you're in a primary school, a special school, a secondary school, and I think from talking to colleagues, and that is about that articulation of the vision, about the passion for learning, making sure that you really help staff to understand the why. So I don't believe that there is a fixed even though I'm an advocate for a cross-curricular approach, broad balanced curriculum, there's not been the same approach in all the schools I've led, because every community, every school is very different, so adapting it. So for here, and I'll just come back to the leadership structure in just a second, but for here we have 83% of children in the school with English as an additional language. So the curriculum here is very different, for example, to the curriculum in the school where I was at in Morden at Hillcross, where it was 3 form-entry, so still quite a large school for primary, but that for me is really important, that we have those experiences that are actually relevant to the children and the community. So for us here, our curriculum has started to develop around questions that the children have about where they live, who they are, how they fit into the bigger world, learning from each other.
Forming an identity in order so that they can move forward.
Absolutely, forming that identity, making those connections in their learning, and beginning to support and learn from each other as well. So we are, the wealth of cultural differences and understanding that we have here is amazing. So from my point of view, from a leadership structure, it's important that each element of the curriculum that needs clear visionary leadership is not just about myself as the head teacher, as a principal. So each of my vice principals has a role within the school, so they have a phase.
Have quite a specific role.
So they have a phase that they're responsible for in the school. So we've broken down into phases. So we have early years, we have phase 1, which is 1, 2 and 3, phase 2, 4, 5 and 6, and then we also have a specialist resource provision here for children with speech and language needs. So we have a vice principal responsible for the specialist resource provision, and then they have different responsibilities that then are key statutory responsibilities. So the curriculum, assessment, safeguarding, inclusion. For me, those 4, and that's something I've evolved over the last 8 weeks and developed further, those 4 are key for a school to be successful. If you've only got one without the other 3, then so if you've got someone leading a curriculum but they're not taking into account the ongoing assessment for learning, it's not going to happen.
It's about connecting it all together, right?
If you haven't got provision, inclusive provision, the curriculum.
What's the most effective way to teach that? Because I know a lot of people would find that, I know I would find that challenging if I was in that position. How do you connect that learning and make sure that the teachers are actually connecting learning to make it cross-curricular?
So what we have begun looking at is the new Ofsted framework of the intent, implementation and impact. For me, I'm really quite excited about the new Ofsted framework in the curriculum respect, because I think it's going to take into account being able to not just look at English and maths, but looking how can we use, for example, a rich quality historical text to influence children's skills and knowledge in history, in English, in physical development, in art, looking at design and fashion, how that's all changed, music, how has that changed across different eras, all from just starting with a particular experience. So I'm really keen that it's meaningful experiences that children have. So a meaningful starting point. What is it that's going to inspire these children to really want to know more? To be eager.
Because if they're not inspired, then they're not gonna shift, right? They're not gonna create that transformation, that progress that otherwise could occur.
And that for me ranges from all sorts of things. It can be the slightest thing where the children walk into the classroom and there's a different smell. I think our senses, teachers think about visual imagery a lot, but they don't think about taste, smell, touch. So for me, those experiences for inspiration, you walk into a room and you smell something different. What's that? You're going to ask questions.
It creates that curiosity and like, I want to be here now, I want to learn something.
Yes, I want to know what's going on.
I'll never forget when I came into your first school in Hillcross and you were walking me around the school. And obviously I've been to hundreds of schools before, right? The school has, walls and it was like Disney World in there. And I was like, it was
trees, beds.
Literally trees, beds, children reading in one corner or lying down and some children writing on, different kind of platforms.
And I think we're at the beginning of a journey here at Pinkwell, but a journey that everybody is committed to being a part of, which is really exciting. And that understanding, you can't move forward with developing children's learning if you haven't got that commitment initially. So for me, that's...
And you're a person that's certainly got that commitment, by the way.
I like to think so, but you know, it's... But we do it for the children, and it's about what's important for the children. The other thing I think is really important is for teachers at the very start of a developmental journey for a school is to understand how children learn. There are lots of teachers who have the most amazing subject knowledge and a really huge set of skills, but they're not able to apply that in the highest possible way, and dare I use that Ofsted term, in an outstanding way, to actually get the most and make sure the rapid progress is happening for the children.
And that's what I'm so passionate about as well, is how do you apply the learning, how do you apply it in context? And it's the same like with leadership, is like one of the things that I think about a lot is how do I, the same way that you were just saying, is like how do you apply that learning to get through to that person, and knowing that individual, like you said, is so important in that. And then it's the same for the teacher, and how do they get the children to apply it, and then knowing the children is so important in that.
So understanding how they learn themselves. So one of the recent inset days, I don't know if you've seen the Winnie the Pooh leadership styles.
No.
So helping, it's using all the Winnie the Pooh characters. And forgive me, I can't remember who the person was who developed it. Her first name was Margaret, but I can't remember her second name. I have to look that up. But she talks about how people see themselves is very different to how other people view them. So helping teachers to become much more self-reflective about not just who they see themselves as, but how other people perceive them, in order that they can then take that learning themselves into the classroom. So how every child perceives themselves may be very different to how the teacher, but also we've talked about how you may have a particular preferred way of teaching. That is your... You know, you revert to that style all the time.
Is that the way, the specific way that child learns?
And it's not about getting the children to change to be like us. It's about us changing and self-reflecting to be and understand to be like and understand the children. So we're providing that wide range.
I know that you're very busy, and I know that you've got to shoot off. And we've got to head off too. But it's been absolutely fascinating speaking with you.
You too. Always welcome, Jazz.
We're doing French and music here from next term.
French and music next term. Really looking forward to that, and hopefully working with you for some after-school provision and some holiday care as well. Brilliant. So really looking forward to that.
Thank you for definitely bringing us on board. I know that we've been in pretty much every school that you've worked in.
Absolutely. But I think that's about the quality that J&C provides, and I think that's what, as well as your ethos and your vision for J&C, which sits really nicely with my own personal view on education. It's also about, you know, when you're paying for a service, you want to know you're getting the quality for the children.
Well, I'm pleased that we can provide that for you.
Yeah, brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. You've been an absolute star.